Good morning, everyone. My name is Tim Richards. I'm Technical Services Manager of the Managing General Agents Association. And on behalf of the MGAA, I'd like to welcome you to our briefing this morning. This is being delivered by Padda Consulting on the subject of CBI operational resilience. Before I introduce our presenter, I'd just like to run through a few housekeeping points. Please ensure your microphone and camera are turned off. If you would like to ask a question, feel free to use the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Time allowing, these will be asked and answered at the end of the event. If we run out of time, questions will be answered post-event. The presentation is accredited for CPD hours if relevant to your ongoing professional development programme. This briefing is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be issued post-event together with the slides and our feedback survey. Please take the time to complete our survey. This will take no longer than 2 minutes and allows us to deliver the best possible future events to our membership. So today's briefing is on the subject of CBI operational resilience from Padda Consulting. So let me introduce you to our presenter, Sunita Padda. Sunita is the dynamic founder of Padda Consulting and more recently Evercomply, boasting over a decade of unparalleled expertise in the insurance sector. Recently, she has been instrumental in regulatory engagements with a prominent GI motor and home insurer, holding distinguished senior roles at firms such as Howden Broking Group, XL Catlin and Lloyds. Sunita's pragmatic approach to compliance has always been rooted in a deep understanding of both business and regulatory landscapes. This approach has led Padda Consulting to be founded on the principles of commitment, collaboration and consultancy. So without further ado, enjoy the briefing, everyone, and over to you, Sunita.
Yes, it'd be good if I knew how to navigate myself on these slides. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining this session. So what are the learning objectives? I'm hopefully going to explain to you the operational resilience principles from board roles to impact tolerances. The 3 pillars of operational resilience. So it's identify and prepare, respond and adapt, recover and learn. And then explain how to implement the operational resilience framework with a view to summarising this into the significance of the continuous improvement and lessons learned exercises. So I'll just skip through very briefly go through the introduction. So this is the central bank's commitment to strengthen the financial system's resilience. It's not dissimilar to the UK. The UK have also doing exactly the same, and the CBI have followed suit. We're looking to address vulnerabilities, mitigate risks, withstand shocks, limit impact of disruptions. The objective is for firms to be able to prepare for, respond to and recover from and learn from any operational disruptions, which we know are quite frequent with a number of things that are going on. Like today in the UK, we've got a train strike. How does that impact your operations, if at all? I won't go through the rest of it as the slides will be circulated. So the concept of operational resilience is your ability to prepare. So the first step in becoming operational resilient is accepting that disruptive events will occur, and these events will need to be managed effectively. So what do you need to do? So a firm needs to have forward-looking plans that can be applied across a range of potential disruptions. So think about the potential disruptions, think about how you would manage those, and then you proactively prepare to withstand and adapt to those disruptions when they inevitably occur. So it's about your testing of those particular scenarios and then taking the lessons learned and then turning those back into your operational resilience framework. There's an increased dependency on technology, and it's only ever, AI now. There's more and more people are depending on technology, coupled with the accelerated pace of change has led to a rise in operational incidents in recent years. So things like cyber attacks and change management issues, terrorist threats, civil disturbances, insider threats, and third-party dependencies, natural causes. The list is endless. And in some shape or form, these events do have an impact on a business, whether quite small or large. So take COVID pandemic and how that really did put firms' operational resilience to the test. So operational resilience is our opportunity for improved decision making and value creation. So that, as I said, there's an international alignment to this. So the more developed principles are from the Banking Supervisions Committee, the Bank of England, the PRA, the FCA. So the CBI are following suit. But in September 2020, the European Commission also published its proposed legislation on the digital operational resilience, so often referred to as DORA, Digital Operational Resilience Act. I'll do a little ending on that because it does work concurrently with the operational resilience requirements. So you shouldn't ignore it. It should be built into what you're doing with operational resilience. So whilst the various policy approaches may differ from different jurisdictions, global regulators are aligned on the fundamentals and core principles. And this, we saw how the global alignment through COVID-19, and a lot of firms have, whilst the UK had set out their requirements for operational resilience just before COVID, during and post-COVID, a lot of firms have adapted to those requirements. So whilst we're talking about CBI in Europe, these have also been adapted in the US, in Singapore, in Australia. And a lot of these firms had these operational resilience principles or requirements in place, but they have further enhanced them from the lessons learned through COVID-19. So what is the scope of application? So the guidance is intentionally not prescriptive, neither is it at a granular level. It allows for a pragmatic application. As such, it's designed to be flexible and can be applied by firms in a proportionate manner based on the nature, scale and complexity of their business. Unlike the UK, it's very prescriptive in terms of who it applies to, how it applies and what you need to be doing. So in the UK, we've got operational resilience requirements are relevant to SMCI enhanced solo regulated firms, insurers, Solvency II insurers, and then it has an indirect impact on the MGA community. So what about implementation? So it's the central bank's expectation that boards and senior management review the guidance. So you've got to be able to evidence this. So have you put something in your board packs? Given that this statement has been out since for a couple of years, what have you been doing? Have you provided any information in your board pack? Because that's the only way that you can show and prove that you've brought it to the attention of the board and senior management. They need to be so the board and senior management need to be engaged. They need to be fully versed. They need to understand what's happening. You also, in terms of the application of the guidance within an appropriate time frame. So whilst there's no specific deadline for this, you do need to show that you are making progress and that you've got some timelines and you've built in some milestones. So you need to be able to evidence that you are doing something with it. Just because there is no defined timeline doesn't mean to say that you don't do anything at all. The central bank considers that an appropriate timeframe will depend on a range of factors. So what's the nature and scale and complexity of the firm's business, and it's more around as well the overall impact on customers and the wider economy. So they expect firms to actively and promptly address operational resilience vulnerabilities and be in a position to evidence action plans to apply the guidance at the latest within 2 years of it being issued. So you really should be doing something now if you haven't done anything at all, because that guidance was issued in 2021. So it's not new guidance. It's been around since 2021. There was a flexibility for you to apply it, but it should be at the latest within 2 years of it being issued. So the clock is ticking. So the central bank will use its risk-based supervisory engagement to assess the core principle of operational resilience in firms, to drive this forward, enhance it and mature it across the financial system in Ireland. So these will include an assessment of board ownership and accountability for the firm's operational resilience strategy and framework. So have you communicated something to the board? Who is the owner of this and how is it being driven forward? The firm's understanding of the delivery of its own critical or important business services. So we'll talk about what all of that means a little later on in the presentation, but you need to be identifying your important business services. And then within that, the key people, the processes, the systems, and you need to identify what are your plans and, such as if you've got a key person that's pertinent to an important business service, and that person was to become sick. What happens? What's your plan B? That's the way you've got to think about this. Preparation is like plan B. And then it's the firm's ability to be able to demonstrate and determine appropriate impact tolerances for its critical and important business services. So you've got to test your ability to ensure that you remain within those tolerances. And then also not forgetting, often third parties form part of our customer journeys. And who are those third parties? How key are they to the process? And with third parties, we often look at the one-on-one outsourcing arrangement. But with operational resilience, the regulators are more concerned about, yes, you've got one arrangement with this third party, but do they subcontract any of their services? And you have to keep going back until there's no more kind of subcontracting in place. You have to capture everything throughout the process. So the 3 pillars of operational resilience. So the overarching principle of operational resilience is accepting that disruptions will occur and firms need to be prepared and respond accordingly. Firm needs to ensure that they have prepared effectively and have the flexibility to withstand, absorb, respond, adapt, recover and learn from these disruptions with minimal impact on their critical or important business services. So these are the ones that keep your business running and will have the most impact on your customers. And that's what the regulator is interested in. Approaching operational resilience through a business service lens encourages the firm to prioritise what's critical and important to their firm. So this is so don't confuse operational resilience with business continuity management. Business continuity management is your inward-looking lens of how a disruption will impact your systems and your inability to operate. That coupled with the outward focus lens in terms of how would that disruption impact your customers? At what point? Is it after 2 hours, 6 hours, 12 hours, 1 day, 3 days? And that's what, when we're talking about impact tolerances, that's what you need to determine is what would be the impact at those intervals in time and the severity of that impact and how quickly can you get up and running. So the 3 pillars of operational resilience, as I talked to earlier on, is identify and prepare. So understand your important business services and the interdependencies. You have to map all these activities such as the people, the processes, technology, third parties for the service delivery. So anybody in that customer journey, proactive preparation to withstand disruptions, respond and adapt, effective response to operational disruptions and adaptations to change during disruption. So what are you learning from it? So what do you need to adapt and change if that disruption was to occur again? And how have you got your comm strategy already? What do you start communicating and to whom do you start communicating when there is a disruption? And then from a recover and learn, you look at what recovery measures are there after the disruption and incorporating those lessons learned into it, constantly improving your that operational resilience. So it's that loop, it's that constant feedback loop, because you have an incident, you learn some lessons, you feed those lessons learned back into the process. And once you've set up your operational resilience framework, the regulator is expecting you to test this. So don't wait for a disruption to occur. Test it to learn from it. Does it work? So when we're talking about identify and prepare, the governance piece, the board of directors need to approve your operational resilience approach, consider the risk appetite, the tolerance, and the disruption to your important business services, otherwise known as IBSs, and then formulating your tolerance for those disruptions. The board of directors would need to ensure that your policies effectively address instances where your capabilities are insufficient to meet the stated tolerance for disruption. So what happens? If you cannot meet that tolerance, it's that notifying the regulator, what's your comms strategy and your comms plan? Under the oversight of the board of directors, senior management would need to make sure that they are implementing operational resilience. As I said, the regulator is expecting firms to have done something at least 2 years after the guidance was issued, and we are now approaching that date, hence the focus on this. So guidance 2 on the operational risk management. So it's your operation function would work alongside other business functions to manage and address any risks. So it's not just there's a person, that person has responsibility for it and they can report to the board. This involves all business areas, because when you start mapping your processes and identify and determine your important business services, that important business service owner could be different to the person who is responsible for the overarching delivery of operational resilience framework. So the respective functions need to regularly assess the effectiveness of the implemented controls and procedures. You also need to make sure that you've got appropriate mechanism in place, that once you've identified your important business services, you've identified your key processes, people, third parties, technology, etc., that when any of those things change in that important business services, where is the trigger to make sure that you review that important business service? So there needs to be, and don't underestimate the work that needs to be done to make sure that this operational resilience framework meets the requirements of the regulator, albeit proportionate to the activities that you are performing. So the guideline 3, the board reviews and approves the criteria for critical or important business services. So you've got to define what's critical to you, what's important. So the board need to be presented with those. They need to understand those and they need to agree those. This then criteria enables you to constantly identify what is critical or important to your business. And don't forget, don't do this and put it on the shelf. Once your strategy or your business plan or your direction of travel changes, you should come back and review this and review your important business services. So it's not, you've done it once and that's it, you can put it on a shelf. It's something that needs to be constantly reviewed and updated. So guideline 4, a firm should identify its critical or important business services. So set the criteria as the foundation for identifying and protecting critical business services. Responsibility. So once you've classified this, who has the responsibility for those IBSs? And then based on the maximum disruption levels, map end-to-end delivery, account for third-party dependencies, essential scenario testing for critical services against severe yet plausible situations. So you've got to think outside the box, because if we thought about 4 years ago when people were thinking about impact of risk and the impact of the environment, I don't think there was a single risk register in our insurance world that would have had COVID on it and the disruption that caused. So you've really got to push and think about the severity of these situations and yet the plausibility of those. And then adapting your critical services based on the business scale and the complexity. So again, it's proportionate and adaptable to the size of your business, because the difference is in Ireland, this applies to all firms. In the UK, it's only the bigger firms. So your impact tolerances. So impact tolerance should be approved for each critical or important business services. And this is actually quite a big piece of work. So you've got to develop the impact tolerances for the disruptions. You've got to define where the maximum acceptance of disruption levels. Remember going back to, is it 6 hours? Is it 12 hours? Is it 24? Is it a day, 2 days? What is that maximum acceptable disruption level? You've got to determine what tools are you going to use to stay on top of this. Whilst regulatory compliance is one measure, it's not the answer to everything. So impact tolerances, your role in understanding these as they pertain to operational resilience, testing impact tolerances against plausible scenarios, and then the annual board review. So the board should review this annually. They should also review any tests that you perform, the lessons that you learn, but at a minimum, the board should review and approve these annually. And as I say, especially after any disruptions. So guideline 6, firms should develop clear impact tolerance metrics. So, at least one impact tolerance metric for each critical or important business service. And the metrics should be measurable, clear. They can be qualitative or quantitative, but you've got to specify those outcomes and measurements. So you've got to be able to measure what you are putting in place. Metrics should allow the firm to determine outcomes, a word that some of you may be familiar with. Outcomes has been a kind of subset of the language of consumer duty over the last kind of couple of years. So you've got to determine the outcomes if those impact tolerances are breached. Essential to have time-based metrics, as I've just said, so that you know where your maximum level of disruption is going to be and where you can prioritize. And then you might consider multiple impact tolerance metrics to handle different disruptions, such as maximum tolerated customers affected, maximum affected transactions, maximum impacted transaction value. So there's a number of ways that you can start thinking about and setting your impact tolerances. Mapping of interconnections and interdependencies. So you've got to grasp the service delivery and potential delivery to remain disruptions to remain within impact tolerance. So what are the chain of activities? Identify all the activities contributing to that important business services. Hence I said, about the mapping of the journey and all the parties and processes and technology involved. So you've got to document those, map the people, processes, tech, information, facilities, and third parties that collaborate your approach across the business for comprehensive mapping. Map resources and stages in detail, understand resource interaction for service delivery, identify ownership and provision of sources, and then you've got the granularity for vulnerabilities. Mapping level must uncover vulnerabilities, dependencies, and resource blending. So you've got to make sure that once you've done it once, you've got to test it. And once you test it, you've got to make sure that you feed in any lessons learned. Mapping of the interconnections and dependencies. So some of the complex operating models and third-party reliance. So depending on the complexity of your operational operations and your reliance on third parties, that will have a dependency on the amount of work that you will need to do for this particular guideline. But disruption anywhere in the network can impact the firm, even if it's not within your own systems. And if I may, a quick example, we had an incident in the London market where you've got a number of activities that were outsourced to a third party by a number of firms. But that outsourcer had subcontracted to another party, and that second party in the chain is where the failure was. So because of that failure, it had an impact on the outsource provider, which in turn impacted a large number of firms. So that's why the importance of identifying, and the regulator wants to understand where that contagion risk is, or where that risk is concentrated, i.e. if like we're all using different outsourcers to provide us with compliance services, but those outsourcers are using somebody else, and that somebody else is a common denominator to all of those outsource providers, that's a problem. Because if that fails, it has a chain effect on a number of entities, and that's why the regulator is interested in mapping those dependencies and outsourcing. Making sure that you've got appropriate written agreements in place, kind of looking at the location of your third parties, the impact of those services, and then I've mentioned about the chain outsourcing awareness and management. Guideline number 9, ICT and cyber resilience. A firm should have ICT and cyber resilience strategies that are integral to the operational resilience of its critical or important business services. I think this is another guideline where but this one is focused specifically on your technology, and this is where, for those firms that are obviously operating in Ireland, you should also be mindful of the Digital Operational Resilience Act, because that plays a significant part here. So we know that technology plays a crucial part in our business models. We need to make sure that, you know, there's some resilience, the robustness and resilience of our technology infrastructure, and the third-party technology resources and their resilience. So how do we do that? It's through that regular testing of those systems, cyber security, what have we got, what's our resilience, and then what's our communication? If there is a cyber attack, how do you lock things down as quickly? What's your plan of action? And do you have your comms ready to go to customers, to stakeholders, to other parties in the chain of insurance? So I think this guideline, as I said, you really do need to be thinking about it along with the central bank's cross-industry guidance in respect of technology and cybersecurity risk, and the relevant European supervisory authority guidance, which I've already referenced, is the Digital Operational Resilience Act. So a lot to think about in this space. And it is quite a lot. I appreciate I'm rattling through, and there's a lot to cover, and it's in a very short space of time. But that's because there is a lot of work to do in this space, so don't underestimate that. So guideline 10, scenario testing. So you've got to get those severe but plausible scenarios. You've got to have a look at your ability to stay with, so your testing should test your ability to stay within the impact tolerances for your important business services. Your testing requires clear and detailed maps of these services. So that's all the work that you've done, so that then you can look at what you've built when you test it. You look at the bits that don't work. That's where your gaps are. That's your lesson learned. Go back around the loop and fix it. Scenario testing involves considering adverse circumstances of all different types of nature, severity and duration. So focus on the risks to delivering your critical or important business services. Mapping helps to identify any unique risks and tailor testing appropriately. And testing obviously should match the size and complexity of your firm, but you should test at least annual, but I would suggest more frequently. And if you have third parties in the chain, you should also bring those third parties into your chain of testing. So, you know, design your test plans, document the exercise, and more importantly, present that to the board. So they should review the scenario testing results. If there was a breach of the impact tolerances, what are you going to do about it? What action are you taking? And those actions need to be presented to the board, so the board can then follow up, because the board have a responsibility too. Excuse me. I'm just going to do a little bit of a time check, because can't see. Oh, there it is. Right. Okay, we're good for time, because I want to leave some time for questions, because I'm sure people will have questions. So on business continuity management, as I mentioned earlier, whilst operational resilience encompasses continuity of business services, it goes beyond that traditional business continuity management. So traditional business BCMs focused on single points of failure. Operational resilience goes beyond that. It extends this to the end-to-end service delivery. So it's not looking at that system failed or the building's on fire. This is more around the impact in that whole chain of events. BCPs aligned with operational resilience should undergo some scenario testing too. So BCPs must account for third-party dependencies and interconnections too. So make sure you identify your key personnel, provide role-specific training for effective contingency plan execution. So when something does go wrong, who are the people who's your core team that need to be fully versed on next steps? Who's your comms person? Who's your system person? Who's your IT person? Who's your stakeholder management person? So they've all got to have their specific roles. Incident management. So the incident management in the operational resilience. So it's integral to operational resilience. It covers the full cycle of events from classification to reflection of lessons learned. So from beginning to end, that's where incident management it's part of that whole process. Develop and implement response and recovery plans for managing those incidents. Plans should address potential disruptions to your important business services. Consider the impact tolerances, impact on risk appetite, and all those metrics for you to respond to. Maintain the inventory for response and recovery capabilities. This should include incident response steps, effective resources, and your comms plans, as I've already mentioned. Review, test, and update incident response and recovery procedures at least annually. And then you've got to learn from these. So learning from incidents. Reflect lessons learned from previous incidents. See what you can bring into the next wave. And then constantly think about updating and adapting this. Communication plans. I've mentioned these a couple of times throughout the presentation. So you need these as part of your operational resilience planning. This is so you know exactly what you've got to do, who's got to do it, and how you've got to communicate this when there is a disruption, especially when that disruption goes beyond your appetite, goes beyond your impact tolerances. So this allows you to identify and prepare your key resources and your experts, helps mitigate harm caused by the disruptions, helps you lock things down a lot quicker. And you need to develop both an internal and an external comms plan. So when there's an initial disruption, it might not have an outward facing impact. So you're not near your impact tolerance breach. However, you do need to let people know internally. So once you let, and your internal comms might be, this is confidential until we tell you otherwise. Because once you start impacting those breaching your impact tolerances, that's when things start to, you communicate externally, it gets media attention. We all saw recently, I think it was it BBC, maybe British Airways, a couple of big firms impacted. So it doesn't take long for the media to get hold of this. So it's what is your comm strategy throughout managing the whole process. So these are all of the pillars, pillar 1, pillar 2, pillar 3, and these are all of the 15 guidelines that I've just talked through. So as I've said before, the Digital Operational Resilience Act also needs to be looked at alongside this. So key provisions of DORA are your ICT risk management, incident management, resilience testing, third-party ICT risks, and your technical standards. So 2 tranches are being prepared by the European Supervisory Agency, and so the CBI will be following that. So what are your immediate steps around that? So you've got to audit your existing ICT risk management systems. You've got to look at incident detection, classification and reporting. Hence I said, do these things concurrently. Conduct some resilience tests. So schedule regular digital operational resilience tests. Oversight and third parties. Establish frameworks to monitor critical ICT third-party service providers and stay updated. So engage in the consultation process for the technical standards and adjust your practices accordingly by December 2024, because the new DORA requirements are effective and you will need to be compliant with those from January 2025. I know this is ambitious, but by now I'm hoping that you will at least be able to explain operational resilience principles, how it impacts from the board roles to the impact tolerances. I mean, impact tolerances and how you set those is almost a session in itself. The outline and how you apply the 3 pillars of the operational resilience, i.e. identify and prepare, respond and adapt, recover and learn. Explain how to implement the operational resilience framework. I hope you have some idea of the work and the things that you need to start thinking about and start doing. And then summarize the significance of that continuous improvement and lesson learned exercise. And with that, you'll be very pleased to hear that the presentation is finished and I'm happy to take questions. But what I will do is stop sharing my screen so I can actually then see hands if there are any hands appearing.
Thanks very much, Sunita. I'll keep an eye on that as well. And as Sunita says, if you do want to show your hands, you're more than welcome to come off mute to ask a question live if you want to. Alternatively, feel free to use the chat facility at the bottom of your screen, and I'll pass those questions on to Sunita. I think Nick's got a question. Yes, Nick.
Different Nick. Beg your pardon.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realise there were 2 Nicks. Beg your pardon. I was looking at Nick Sims. Nick Dodson, I'll come to you afterwards.
Sunita, thank you. Can you please give an explanation of the difference between critical business services and important business services? So important business services are UK speak, are customer-facing services. What's the difference in the Irish model?
I mean, I don't have the definition here, but from the top of my head, a critical business service would be something that if that was impacted, then your operations would like fall down for, let's say, 6 months and start to impact your because I'm assuming you've done some work on this in the UK then in terms of your familiarity with important business.
Yeah, I've run projects for some of the largest banks and indeed some of the big insurers. So yeah, so are these things like treasury, which are not typically an important business service in UK speak?
It could be, because some firms did look at that in terms of treasury, but it's like, it depends. It's your resilience and your ability. So once you start going through and mapping the processes, and then you identify through a set of definitions and criteria as to what's important to the business, i.e. customer facing, where your impact tolerance is, and then you'll have other ones where actually if there was a disruption in one of those customer journeys or one of those business journeys, that it would cause a significant impact. So that I would determine as critical, i.e. it impacts you financially. Is it your third party, your bank, all your money got taken? You've got to look at the severity of that in order to, critical is it's going to shut you down, I think, or you won't be able to trade.
Is there a clear definition? I have read through the CBI documentation. Is there a clear definition? Because I don't remember seeing one.
I don't think there is, but I will have a look. I'll take that away with me, Nick, and have a look. But from the top of my head, I don't think they define, because the way in which they've issued, it's not a policy statement, it is a guidance document, hence the flexibility for implementation, and the interpretation is also quite flexible.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sunita. And Nick Dodson, over to you. Thank you. You're on mute, Nick, at the moment.
It segues nicely, because I was thinking about the impact tolerances for the 2 different regimes. Because a critical business service, the impact tolerance on that, is there a suggestion that that would inevitably be different to what we're looking at in the UK?
I don't think it's different. I think it's almost like, well, you've got to start with mapping out all of your journeys, and then you define what's important to the business, important and what is critical. And once you've got that definition and criteria, you then start measuring all your journeys against that. And through that, you'll say, right, we've mapped out 20 journeys, and through the 20 journeys, we've identified through our definition that 6 of these are important and 1 is critical because of your definition. So it's almost like you've got to go through a process, but you've got to start right by mapping everything in order to determine what is important and what is critical, because it's that impact tolerance piece. When we did this in the UK for a number of insurers, we found that was where the most where it was really complex to identify that first point of impact, and then how that impact evolved over a day, and how much resilience was there in the firm to accept that. And from a critical perspective, it was always around the money stuff, and as Nick Sims says, around things like treasury, your inability to operate. But you might say, well, we've got our shareholders up there, we've got PE providers, and we can get money access to money quite quickly, and therefore we can mitigate that. So it's not a one size fits all. You've got to determine what is important and what is critical to your business, because it's your ability as well to manage through that process. And some firms will have the ability to manage through some of those important business services better than others.
Thanks, Sunita. Thanks, Nick. Any other questions at all? I've got none come through on the chat. Feel free to use the chat facility, or come off mute and ask the question directly. Put your hand up. Now's the time. It does seem to have all gone quiet. So I don't know if you have any closing thoughts, Sunita.
I think that, I think the one message I would say is yes, it's a proportionate application of the guidance, but do not underestimate the work that needs to be done to be compliant with not just the CBI's operational resilience guidance, but also the Digital Operational Resilience Act. And if anybody does have any questions, because often people feel, I don't want to put anything on the chat. Is there any good guidance? And yes, there is, and I can send that round as well. If people don't feel like they want to ask questions in this public forum, then please feel free to pass questions on to Tim, and I would be more than happy to respond to those via email.
Absolutely. Just a reminder of my email address, which is tim.richards@mgaa.co.uk. And Bren, I just saw your question there. Will we get a copy of the slide deck? Yes, indeed you will. So that will follow in due course, with a link to the recording as well, so you can watch that again. So thank you very much, Sunita, and thanks everyone for being here. And that's an essential presentation, really, so I hope you all have enjoyed it. Thanks for joining us. Please don't forget to provide your feedback once you receive the email from me, and do look out for forthcoming MGAA events. Hope you have a productive day.
Yeah, sorry, Tim, if anybody does want a presentation on DORA, then maybe they could let you know as well. If that's something, if there's an appetite for that, then we can certainly try and pull something together for that too.
Yeah, definitely. Sunita and I were talking at the top of the call just before everyone joined, and I'll include a question on our feedback survey, so do feel free to put it there, but also send an email as well. We've already got someone that said yes to Dora, so it looks like that's popular.
I promise it's not Dora the Explorer for anyone with young kids.
Thanks again. Hope you have a productive day, everyone. Thanks, Sunita. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Enjoy your day. Thank you.